Stephen Meyer's $3.8 billion budget. What do you think?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think there was a lot of cuts in that, and I think government's trying to spin this message that they made hard decisions, and I think that they didn't. They made really easy decisions, and they made them on the backs of the hardship of people who need programs from them. So I think that um, probably a major disappointment in government for me, and I think clearly the public, when they start seeing some of these things roll out, are going to feel it too. And I don't know how much anybody's paying attention to it right now, but they will when it starts hitting their pocketbook, and it's pocketbook issues that defeat COVID.
Let's pick up on that in a bit. But I mean, it makes you wonder when you look at this. I mean, we prorogued for a month to get this document ready. It's delivered 2 weeks after the end of the fiscal year. And there's really not a whole lot there other than cuts to things you built.
I built that shot. Yeah.
But this, you could almost call this, let's kick Stephen Myers in the ass budget.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, what goes around comes around. What they're saying. I'm also a voter, and I'm a voteful one too. So I think, at the end of the day, I'll have my say. I was obviously, I mean, I'm disappointed to see them like, I don't know. I get it. The EV rebate is not particularly a good rebate. It was a kind of a window dressing rebate that we used to get people attracted to climate change. I can see sunsetting that one. Taking away the bicycle rebate is like completely heartless. Like, I mean, and not that I necessarily need the rebate, but I used the rebate with my own children. And just a couple of weeks ago, and the young fellow that was selling bikes at Sport Check said, "I think this is the best program government ever had." He said, "I sold 21 bikes yesterday to children." So I mean, it's children's bikes that you were taking away doing this. I think it was $50,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when you say you made a hard decision, you made an easy one at the expense of children.
Well, that would have been a line item in a Excel spreadsheet somewhere that nobody really drilled down into. I think, to your point, that would be an affordability question now for how can families who are already being pressured afford to get their kids even basic recreational equipment.
What do you think got for heat pumps? Did you get one?
I didn't
Did you
get
make too much money?
right.
I didn't get one because I make too much money. It was that there was an income threshold that you had to be below to get it. So it was people that were hurting. We were trying to help them at home. It was an affordability program. Um, so government's like, oh, we're going to wrap it up into this one-time payment but if you look at all the hurt they create to give this one-time payment, you know why you go.
Well, you know what? That's an interesting thing because what we're talking about is taking the basically subsidy, the HST offset from our maritime electric bills, which was costing about $13 million a year, and creating a new payment to islanders and island families that will range from 310 to what, $380 or something like that per quarter. That'll double the cost to 26 million. I think politically that may be one of the stupidest things I've ever seen because everyone gets a maritime electric bill every month, and if the average bill is increasing 50 to $20 a month, every islander will notice that. The quarterly payment of 310, if you're an individual, is like what, 75, $80, something like that. So you have to endure 3 months of maritime electric increased fees. That's assuming Maritime Electric doesn't increase any fees before you get the provincial payment. I just wonder whether there's anyone in this government with a political sense.
Yeah, there is. I mean, we talked about it last week, though, Paul, and I think the whole budget gets cooked before anybody gets to see it. Like the caucus themselves would have saw it probably the morning that it got presented. So there's no way changing it at that point. The whole thing is locked in. The cabinet wouldn't have been a whole lot of time before that they would have seen it. So this rests on the shoulders of the finance, I think. And I honestly think that after the end of this year and Jill Burge managed to rack up $1.3 billion in debt to this province, the premiership over, put it in a different portfolio and put somebody else in there because
Or maybe the premier should either call an election because he doesn't have a mandate or step down. For,
election day.
you don't think the Tories could win an election?
The poll come out this week has them in third.
The narrative poll that came out this week,
Has them in third.
tell me about that.
The Greens are in first. The Liberals and Tories are tied. So I wouldn't go into an election with them.
I've not seen those numbers, but now I'm
They
very.
don't publish it anymore, so I don't know. I don't have a subscription to it.
What numbers did you hear? You're breaking news here, Myers.
I don't remember them offhand.
You remember them.
I'll give them to you after this is over.
But we have listeners who want to be given this information.
I don't have it. I can't.
The Greens are in first.
The Greens are first. And Matt McFarland's the most popular leader.
If that's true, no, but if that's true, and the Greens have sort of come out of the basement, that's bad news for the Tories, because their whole sort of re-election thought process had to be focused on keeping the Greens down and neutralizing the Liberals.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily bad news. I mean, on the surface, it looks like bad news for sure, but I think the Tories need the Greens strong because it takes away from the Liberals, and I think that probably the bump that the Greens are seeing are angry Tories. Remember, we talked every week here so far about Tories are angry, so they're probably parking their vote there. And will they vote for them? I don't know. My time will tell if they'll follow through if they're angry.
Oh, that's fascinating. Let's veer back.
I mean, so we have we'll have a $1.3 billion debt built up in 3 years here.
That's if you hit a projection.
That's if you hit projection. You're cutting from the lowest income people in Prince Edward Island and children, and you're in third place in the poll.
And you are a premier based on about 300 Tories voting. You really have to let's get into that after we sort of digest the budget, but we can talk about whether Rob Lance has a mandate to govern, because it may be increasingly apparent that he doesn't have a mandate. My concern with the budget is I do not believe in wholesale cuts to public service or anything like that. But if you think you can punt a $3.8 billion budget down the road, even for 1 year, and not have it negatively impact all of us, you're delusional. If you look, and frankly, the finance minister is spinning a narrative along with the premier that every province is in the same boat, that we're all sort of trying to swim in this pool together. But if you compare us to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, our provincial deficit as percentage of the population is 40% higher than New Brunswick's, 100% higher than Nova Scotia's. Both of those provinces were downgraded, and it took about a month before the bond rating agency came in and downgraded. You have to think, because I was reading a Royal Bank of Canada analysis this morning, our provincial deficit is by far the highest in the country on a per capita basis. That is really bad news, because even if you look inside the budget, the projections seem really quite rosy on the revenue side. And we know that this government has been incapable of reining in or controlling expenditures. And we see actually nothing in this budget to try to curtail anything. So the question is, are we digging ourselves a hole so deep that next year or the year after, we're going to have to get into some serious, serious cuts? If you look at the capital budget, for instance, you would be aware of this, the Georgetown School. It's on the capital list. Our favorite new MLA, Brendan, was bragging about it being built in the House a couple of weeks ago. But if you're looking at a capital budget, and that project isn't supposed to start for 2 years and be finished in 2030, you got to wonder what the odds are that it will, at best, just get bumped down the road.
Well, nobody in Charlottetown wants it. I mean, that's what you're.
I'm not asking anything.
It wouldn't matter. I think if there was a $1 billion surplus, they don't want it in Charlottetown. So I think that it's incumbent on those of us who live in the community and our local MLA to fight on our behalf, because they didn't mind blowing the budget out of the water for the Stratford High School. Like, I think the first budget I heard was $24 million. Like, it must be up to $95 million now. Money just kept flowing to that, flowing to that, flowing to that. And that's all in those numbers that we're talking about. So it can't be good for your community, not good for mine.
It's interesting that I know that the finance minister has talked about how each department was asked to find savings, and she had a really telling comment on Compass the other night, because the biggest cost in any provincial budget is salaries. It's like 60% of everything we spend, right? Or it may even be more than that. But she said by the time the departments looked at programming and by the time they got through counting salaries, there wasn't that much left to cut. And so if you don't have a plan for the public service that is strategic and transparent and open, you're going to be forced at some point in time in the near future to get very draconian in terms of what we pay for and how we pay for it. I'm amazed. Again, it goes back to, does this government even have a political antenna, that the NHL contract has survived this budget? The Department of Tourism, PEI, has revenues of $16 million, $7 million of which is golf, expenditures of $36 million. The marketing budget is like $11 or $12 million, but there's no straight line item for NHL. How in the hell, to your point about bikes, why is it more important to fund a sponsorship with the NHL that benefits politicians and senior bureaucrats without one iota of data ever coming out to say it's bettered our tourism industry, and the family on modest earnings can't get a benefit on a bike now?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think that, I think the finance minister yesterday question period tried to compare we kept the $10 a day daycare and took away the bikes. If they were the same thing, like the same people don't use those services, that put a baby on a bike. Like it's not, it's when you get to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like those are the kids you're taking away from. And the other thing is to your point, I think there's deeper decisions already made that they're not sharing with us. And I'll challenge you to go back and watch question period yesterday and watch how the finance minister was answering questions. She was awful cautious, and she reset herself a number of times with ums, and she had a lot of ums yesterday. Which is an indicator to me, Paul, that either she didn't want to say the truth,
or she's meditating.
So I think that she knows more that she's telling, and she doesn't want to say it. I mean, there's telltale signs in the legislature the way questions are answered that can tell you more than the answers.
Oh, totally. And the province has basically said we're going to try to cut 5% the next 2 years, but not this year.
So you know what's going to go? This rebate that the people are getting in lieu of having cheap power, that'll be gone. That's why you take it all out and put it in a separate fund, and then they'll cut it in half next year. Well, you don't need as much money, and there'll be a whole bunch of reasons why this changed and the price of oil is down. Like they'll have all kinds of excuses. They probably already have them built, and they'll cut it in half. The next year it'll be gone.
Do you think there will be an election before then?
Well, there has to be one by 2027, but I don't see a path for them to go before then.
I mean, I don't think they can drop a budget that cuts spending by 5% next year. So this is their pre-election budget. You would think they would either go this fall or spring before budget.
You can't go to an election with a budget like this.
Well, this may be this may be the best one they have, right? Because they're trying to pin this as we didn't want to give you a fiscal shock. It's okay, by the way, to give future generations our fiscal shock today.
Yeah, not even giving them a bicycle to race
Yeah. I mean, that may become the theme of this whole budget, is you're trying to put the fiscal house in order on the back of kids who just want to go for a bike ride and maybe go fishing in a pond somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, think of it, Paul. I think it was a really successful program, and you see kids around riding their bikes, and government has spent millions and millions and millions of dollars building active transportation trails for them to bike on. And you see them all in towns all across PEI doing it. That's not to say that people won't still be able to afford bikes, but what do you say to the people who can't? And I'll tell you, like, I think the bikes that we bought ended up being $61 each.
Well, yeah.
Bored of them with people to buy bikes.
Yeah, if you look at the budget and if you compare it to the bike cut, executive salaries in health PEI are budgeted to increase $2 million this year. $2 million. That's after all the hell they went through last year with all the hires and everything like that. We're going to be spending $1 million more on salaries in the electronic medical record office, which, to me, something like that says, when can we get serious about how we govern in this region and start cooperating with the other provinces so we do things rather than everybody have an electronic medical record that doesn't work with each other? Have one. Create, invest up front and then sort of share the cost. I mean, it may not save a whole lot of money, but it'll make healthcare better. It'll create efficiencies, but government I mean, we see it in this budget. The government is just trying to survive rather than lead right now.
I'll ask you this, Paul. Tell me if this makes sense. Instead of cutting $50,000 for children's bikes, do you think it makes sense to bring in legislation asking all MLAs to take 10% pay cut? A $150,000 cabinet minister be $15,000. You wouldn't be long coming up with your bike rebate if the
Well, they just took a 2.75% increase on MLA salaries and a 2.75% increase on cabinet minister salaries. That's like base and at base. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I think it was 2.75. Could have been 2.5.
can survive on $140,000 a year instead of $150,000 a year.
I think the optics of any increase for a politician is difficult.
But we're all in this together. I'm willing to take these hard hits with you, but what one hard hit?
Well, the problem
Still have their big salary.
It's the perks, right? There's almost no MLA on the government side who doesn't have a second check coming in. They may all have a second check, deputy whip, government house leader, all those things. And they add up. The one thing I have with government salaries, MLA salaries, is it's tough for them to come in and say we should raise our salary X. But when you look at the work of the Indemnities and Allowances Commission, and they use this completely unrelevant comparison of what politicians are paid in other provinces, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick predominantly, but they never compare riding size. So an average riding size in Nova Scotia may be 5,000 voters. Average riding size in PEI maybe 2,500 voters, right? But
well, and there's two sides to this. I do think you have to, in order to attract the quality people that you want, you have to, but which is separate from the fact that you could give yourself a pay cut right now and be a part of the austerity.
If you want to attract quality people, you have to somehow eliminate the party nomination system, right? Because the party nomination system rewards those who know people in the party, have been around a long time. Nobody ever asks a CV for a CV. And I believe in diversity. Different perspectives, different worldviews, different realities make for better governance. But look, we have not been helped because of how political parties nominate their candidates.
No, and that's fair. It doesn't attract people though either, Pollock. Just there's a ton of negativity and stuff, which is fine. I guess you and I are now part of it. But either way, and just having lived the life, there's a point where you're like, I don't know, my mom is gonna read those comments that some jackass is putting on Facebook and think that person matters to me, which they don't, but it matters to her. So you start dragging your family through all this negativity, and you're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And then other people look and say, well, that guy talking about me like that.
Yeah, we've never had a problem finding 27 candidates for each of the main two parties. So,
yeah, but do you have the people you want running the province? It's the question.
well,
You
know what?
you have the 27 best people in each of those districts running the province.
I'll tell you, no, we don't. I mean, but Dennis King, I remember he taught me perhaps the greatest lesson I've learned about leadership because he followed Wade McLaughlin. And if you compare those two CVs, there's zero comparison. But since debt to GDP ratio today is really important to our province because we can get into the guardrail after this, but Wade McLaughlin was the only premier in recent island history who looked at something like debt to GDP ratio and said, we need to tackle that. Sure. He did. Yeah. And when COVID came along and Dennis came in, your government had the fiscal capacity to deal with it. Oh. Leadership, Wade would still be trying to get a program out on COVID. Dennis looked at COVID through the eyes of close red and white.
If Wade McLaughlin had had Dennis King's political skills, he might have been elected for 50 years. That because I think from a governance side, he did a really good job.
Well, he'd certainly know when to leave. Because, man, that may be his greatest trick yet, is when to enter and when to leave. Dennis would not be doing well in this environment.
He wouldn't take bicycles away from kids. I know that for sure. I know for sure he would not. Absolutely for sure.
I don't know.
He would. I know Dennis King really well. I know for sure he would not.
Right. But what else would he have cut? Because he didn't like cutting.
He didn't like cutting, no, but he wouldn't have cut that either.
It's interesting. Yeah, let's talk about the fiscal guardrails. because I think that's fascinating. Jill Burridge points to 40% debt to GDP ratio and our interest on debt or something like that. It's another ratio. We're almost at 40% now. I think we're at 30%. And the problem is when you hide behind political rhetoric, like a word like guardrail, and then if our expenses are more than 2% this year, we're going to be pushing 40% next year. But what does that actually mean? The premier isn't going to call an election. The finance minister isn't going to step down. They're not going to give away their salary. So there's no penalty for actually running over and through the guardrail.
Yeah, there isn't. And I think at the end of the day, if they wait out until 2027 to go to an election and the economy changes or something good happens that we can't see coming yet that comes down the line, then the electorate might even forget about it. That's the crazy part about it. So like, they might even be forgiven for having such a terrible budget.
I would say if your news on the narrative poll is correct, there's a lot of stuff baked in on Rob Lance right now.
If it was a lie, it was a lie to me. So.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't be the first time there have been lies involved with politicians.
But
you're a former one who almost old enough to be pensioned for it too.
A year and a half.
Let's talk about Sydney, because this is really interesting in terms of how the government is going about this. I think it's a knock against the premier in a lot of ways. It's not everybody has known that Sydney should be in cabinet to figure out some way. But again, Rob Lance went out and bragged about raising this issue at the highest levels of the government of Canada, Prime Minister on down. Guess who didn't listen to Rob Lance? Everyone in Ottawa. So they're stuck into a situation right now where they have to come in with legislation that is going to involve taking time away from other really important pieces of legislation to ensure that Sydney doesn't have to be dropped from cabinet next week. I mean, it's sort of a PR nightmare because there's no way the government looks good at this.
Oh, there's so many angles going on here, Paul. So I'll go into the top first. I'll start there. I mean, if that's true that the premier went right to the prime minister, I certainly wouldn't have told the public that unless he gave me a resounding yes, this is absolutely happening.
Bingo.
It looked like you go to Ottawa and say anything you want. If it won't listen, what difference? So there's that. The other thing I have is I'm going to jump to Brendan Curran because I know you don't like when I say he should be in cabinet. Here's Brendan taking another look at the team. He's the one putting the bill on the floor for Rob Lance. And I will guarantee you, Brendan will be ignored for putting the party ahead of himself again. But
well, that's what they did with Corey Deagle. It's the exact same playbook, right?
I know, like this is how the party parts of politics fall apart. If you're going to have soldiers, you have to recognize that they are.
Yeah, well, the challenge the Tories have, if half their cabinet comes east of Charlottetown, it's going to be really easy to defeat them elsewhere in the province.
Yeah,
because we've heard, we've both heard about internal polls within the government, within the Liberals and Tories that have Liberals strongly ahead in Charlottetown. Have you heard that?
The first, I would say based on the District 2 by-election, and you saw the closer it gets to Charlottetown, the rhetoric got,
yeah,
that's a bleed out, not a bleed in.
Yeah,
so that's the red bleeding out from down.
How much does the potential and the need for a by-election in District 16 to play into all this?
Well, we talked about it a little last week. Like if the Liberals were on Robert Mitchell, and like probably if I was the premier, I'd run nobody and say, "Here, have it.
Yeah,
come on in, and you can be a part of this and show us what you got."
Yeah, but then it comes down to when you're going to call the general.
In 2027, go to the date. I don't think he's stuck. He has to go to the date now. I don't know what other option he has.
Because it ain't going to get better. I mean, they have no easy out. I mean,
he has to stabilize it, though.
Does this government strike you as one that's capable of stabilizing anything when they produce a budget like this, knowing that they missed last year's deficit projection by close to $300 million? Those books, by the way, aren't closed yet, and it's at 450.
Well, here's the thing. I'll jump back into the budget. I did want to talk about Sydney a little more, but like somebody, a good orator, which they have very few of, has to come out and explain to the public the entire plan on how we're not going to let you starve to death, how all these cuts isn't going to, uh, ruin communities and those types of things. Like, somebody has to talk about a very much higher level. Not that we gave you money and it's a better way to spend money than spend it on this. Like, no one believes that. It's all rhetoric stuff. Yeah, somebody has to come out and orate a vision for what they're actually trying to accomplish, so that people can wrap their brains around it and feel calm and say, okay, well, they're going to do this, but they have at least these plans of how they're going to raise revenues or make economic activity happen here in the province that will bring money.
Who's that in government? Rob is not a great communicator. There's something about how he communicates that's always he just hasn't been able to resonate with Islanders. Goes back to when he was a Charlottetown City Councillor, too.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. I mean,
Zach Bell is a good communicator,
that's a good communicator.
but I don't think he's the guy to be delivering this. He was the chief chirper for the NHL deal.
Yeah, well, Zach's a good communicator. I think Darlene Hopkins a pretty competent communicator.
She is, actually.
She brings a lot of poise into the conversation, and maybe there's multiple strands on how you would roll out a plan. But I think government now needs a marketing plan for government. How you're going to convince people that you have our best interests at heart and not just some bantam number that you want to get the budget to so you can fix the net to GDP ratio, because no one cares if they can't buy.
Well, they need to change the narrative somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's going to be tough.
You can't use the Dennis King method. Those days are gone. People don't even like Dennis would probably struggle today. I think he would reckon it
He would totally struggle.
too. There's so much negativity. Like there has to be a whole different strategy on how you're going to market yourselves. That's not the same as it's ever been before. So to think outside the box and bring kind of a vision that's understandable at the coffee shops, not in the mansions, right?
That's a tough sell when you're just raising electrical rates by $15 to $20 for everybody on average. I mean, that's the stupidity of that decision, right?
Terrible time. It's probably the policy itself to artificially lower rates was a terrible policy. So there's that, but it's terrible timing to take it away.
But it's been around for a long time too. It's baked in, right? So when the minister says electrical rates aren't increasing, that's sort of like saying, you want to have their cake and eat it too.
Your bill's good.
And that's exactly what I meant when I said that will be the monthly reminder that the electrical bill has gone up under this government. And that'll have a more powerful effect on individuals and how they perceive this government than quarterly getting a check for $320.
You reach into my pocket and I don't forget to get the polls. That's the mantra of it.
Correct. Very easy to forget the 300. Let's finish off Sydney with what?
So I talked about the Brandon thing. So I'll talk about conflict of interest at a high level, and then what's going to happen here. Let's start with what's going to happen. The parties will block it getting done in time. I think they pretty much indicated that it won't get done in time, which is understandable. That's politics. Conflict of interest is kind of a funny thing because, I mean, if everything lined up and Sydney was able to put it in a blind trust or have somebody else fish it or what other businesses do, he doesn't come to a cabinet table and forget he owns a fishing fleet. It's like the conflict of interest is kind of a bit of a fallacy in my opinion. Like if you came into cabinet, Paul, and had to take your operation here and put it in blind trust, you don't forget that you own it. So I think there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors with conflict anyways. And the second thing I'll say is this, like I think Sydney asked for 60 days and the conflict of interest commissioner gave him 10, which indicates to me she's not on board with some of this stuff.
She gave him a 10-day extension.
Right. I think he asked for the 60 days.
I think that was 60 days was already coming to an end.
No, I think he could ask for up to another 60.
Yeah, that's after the House closed, and I mean that basically gets him through that.
Sure, but she only gave him 10. I think, which indicates to me that she's not in the camp of let's help Sydney fix this.
Well, you know what? I think she was. I think her comment publicly was, the House is sitting, and I didn't think it was sort of my job to interfere in that. So she's giving them time.
And I know her and I like her well, so I'm not. It's not knocking her. I actually get along with her really well. But to play this out a little bit more granular than probably everybody else is thinking, if if the date comes and passes and she has to make a ruling, and the ruling has to be that Sydney has to be let go from cabinet or give up his seat, which is like the absolute worst case scenario, which I doubt she would do. That report still just comes to the legislature to be voted on, which it will not likely pass. Like, and then what? She basically has to resign. The House basically says we've lost confidence in you if that's the case. So there's a whole other quagmire here.
Does Sydney get to vote on that? Should he recuse himself from cabinet? I mean,
This is the quagmire that's brewing, right? So it's a lot deeper than just will Sydney be in cabinet or not, because if a report comes, government will vote to protect Sydney because they want him in cabinet, and then the conflict of interest commissioner has absolutely no choice but to resign, which I believe she will.
do you think it's fascinating? I mean, Sydney is clearly a primary cog in the cabinet, but it also speaks that they're putting so much trust in a single person that the premier or his people don't see a whole lot of depth in the caucus.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, there's probably other things at play that I wouldn't necessarily know about. I kind of thought Susie Dillon would get in, like I think.
I thought for Charlottetown as yet.
Yeah, and then I mean, basically, if they go to an election, Robert Mitchell's going to run against her, so I think you'd want to bolster her where you could and give her a role that she could thrive in, but they didn't, for whatever reason. So I think there's other choices, and I think that Shuffle didn't go deep enough, and I touched on it earlier. He probably should have moved Jill Bird. She definitely needs to move her now to another role and put somebody else in there to try to change this. If you want to talk about changing the narrative, you have to change the narrative. So she's delivered the bad news. Move her on. Put somebody in there.
Who in cabinet?
Come back in there because, like, somebody who's a more steady hand and has earned her stripes and has earned.
Doesn't this come down to the premier and how he leads? I mean, the finance minister can push back. That's sort of her job or his job to push back on departments who just want to spend, spend, spend.
Yeah.
Ultimately, isn't it the premier who has to say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why it matters, and I'm leading this ship? It's not so much Jill Birch there. And everything I've heard is she has actually tried to be a reasonably good steward of the public purse, but she's lost that fight. So I'm not sure she has credibility anymore.
No.
I'm not sure. We got to talk about Rob Lance. Does he have a mandate? Given all the things that have happened and given the fiscal state of this province, if we get downgraded and our debt payments, which are already jumping $30 million from 170 to $201 million, go up again, should he call an election based on the Tories' record?
Well, I don't know. I think there's two different mandates you would have there. Does he have a public mandate? Probably not, because he didn't go to the polls to get one. Does he have a legal mandate? Of course he does, because that's the Westminster system. He's the leader of the party who's in power, so he's premier, and he's also elected, so he did win his own seat to be there. But it's a good question. I think they would lose if they went, so I'm not sure what metric he would use to convince himself it was a good idea to go, because it's not. So I think I think it comes down to the public. If they scream loud enough and say you don't have a mandate, but I'm not really hearing that, and the Liberals aren't even saying it.
No, the Liberals, interestingly, aren't saying it. Greens aren't saying it. But it would be if this narrative poll does get leaked, which I sort of hope it does now. Well, you did well, but you didn't give us numbers. I mean, you bet. Come on. Of course. Well, you don't have to be. You literally in a poll only have to remember three numbers, Stephen. Which also explains why. Well, it also explains why we're in this pickle with this government, because you were a big member of this government for a long time. Let's start wrapping it up. Let's go to we're going to have a star of the week. You go first this time.
I'm going to pick Hal Perry. I thought, particularly yesterday in question period, Hal was really strong on holding government to account. And he was asking questions about my programs they've cut, so maybe that's why I picked him. But I thought he did a really good job. He stayed on his point really well. And to be honest, Hal's been doing a really good job this whole session, in my opinion. So Hal, to me, is my starter.
I'm going to choose Matt McFarland because I really do think that, and this was before I heard anything about the narrative poll, is hitting his stride. And the example I will use was in the legislature yesterday. We're filming this on Friday, so it was Thursday. He framed every question he asked around the legislation the government is bringing in for Sydney and how that is more of a priority than things like maritime electric.
Yeah, that was what I thought.
Yeah, because it really focuses on where the premier's eye is.
He should have taken all 6 questions, and no offense to Carla, but I think he was on something really good, and they should have stuck to it. So he doesn't get a lot of questions. He's 37%. Matt McFarland is. So he's as popular as Mark Carney.
So 37% as the preferred leader.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got it right there. Oh, so tell us some news, Stephen.
30% for the Greens, 19% for the Liberals, and 18% for the Tories. Practically tied for the Liberals and Tories.
Holy Jesus! I mean, the Greens were at like 18%.
Yeah.
So
They might be getting the next.
You're breaking big news here, man. It's big news. You know it's big news. It's seismic.
I've been trying to say week after week come here that there's a problem inside the Tory party and it can't be ignored, and this number may indicate that I was right. It can't be ignored any longer.
So how do you deal with it there, big dog?
Well, you know how you deal with it? You have to get out and face to face all of these people. You've got to go to all the people that you know, and I'm not going to name anyone. It's not fair to them that are mad. Everyone inside the party knows who's mad.
Rob's not going to do that.
You have to go and sit at their kitchen table, hear it right from their mouth why they're mad.
We lost a premier for a year because he was distracted. And you're suggesting be distracted more. I understand why you're doing it. But I don't think Rob Lance is going to go knock on anybody's door and grovel. I've never got the sense.
When you go to doors and people are mad, just in a general election, Paul, and you go to doors and people are mad, you take it.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and in some cases for me, they vote for me because they're like, just want to get that off my chest. Sometimes people just want to get it off their chest.
The Tories didn't even try to reach a hand out on the night that the leadership election was held.
Sure, I'm just saying, you asked me how to fix it, that's how you fix it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be involved, but at the end of the day, that's how you fix it.
Stephen Myers, this is episode 4, Because Life is Local. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube under PEI Canada Video, and on our website, PEI Canada, under the podcast tab. So you can basically find us anywhere.
We're big time.
Let's do this again.
All right, thanks, man.
Thanks.